listening to Sasquatch Syndicate.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard.
And all the ape believers don't want any of the paranormal believers to say anything because they're all whacked and screwed up and we don't want them to. And all the paranormal believers don't want, going to the ape believers saying, well, you're all closed-minded, you're not open to the fact that it does this and it does that.
And I look over my left shoulder and this creature is running through the woods and it's bulldozing a brush down. And I knew, man, this thing is going to get me.
Welcome to Sasquatch Syndicate. I'm your host Chuck out in Seattle, Washington, along with Paul in Portland, Oregon. Thanks to everyone for listening and those following us at SasquatchSyndicate.com and on our social media outlets. For those participating in the Sasquatch Syndicate monthly t-shirt giveaway, this month's winner was Gary Crows from Agassiz, British Columbia. So Gary, congratulations, thanks for listening to the show, and please check your Facebook for winner notification. Happy December, everyone, and happy holidays. We hope everyone gets to spend some time with friends and family this month. And for those in the military away overseas serving our great country, we know that not everyone gets to come home for the holidays, so just wanted to say we do appreciate your service, and we hope this month's episode brings a little bit of home to you throughout this season. So let's get on to this month's episode. Tonight on Sasquatch Syndicate, we're joined by Angie out of Bothell, Washington. So Angie, welcome to Sasquatch Syndicate, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your background and where you're from for our listeners.
So I currently live in Bothell, Washington, pretty clove to Snohomish, and been living in Washington since 2002. And it's pretty similar to Canada, where I'm from in British Columbia. It's about an hour and a half drive to 2 hours to where I grew up, and it's called White Rock, British Columbia, and it's very close to the Blaine, Washington border. And I lived there for 31 years.
And when you were growing up as a kid up in British Columbia, did you do a lot of things in the outdoors?
I did. We had a huge backyard, well, huge yard. We had about an acre, just over an acre of land. And so I was always outside climbing trees, playing on the swings, just hanging out outside, going to trails. There was a ton of trees that surrounded us and in between neighbors, so it was really spacious.
And where did you live in British Columbia? You said White Rock, but were you, like, is it a rural area? Is it a city?
Well, at the time, now it's considered a city for sure, but at the time there wasn't a whole lot of development, homes or shopping centers. It was really foresty.
As you were kind of growing up, too, did you guys spend a lot of time camping? Did you guys do any outdoor activities?
When I was in 7th grade, 6th grade, we would go on camping trips to the lakes, but that was quite far away from where I actually lived. But I was always, going around, family vacations, we'd go to lakes, which was 3 hours away. But I was pretty much an outdoorsy kind of kid. I'd ride my bike all around the neighborhood, roller skate. I was outside in the summertime 80% of the time.
In British Columbia, kind of growing up, what animals were you familiar with, and did you have any experiences with bears and things like that?
No experiences with bears, amazingly enough. I never really saw cougars, or I saw mountain lions, but that was more towards Vancouver, BC, and around Grouse Mountain, ski resorts and whatnot. But as far as my community, neighbors had horses. Everyone had, dogs and cats. We had a horse and a dog and a cat, but nothing really not wildlife per se. that maybe the other thing would be the, you know, occasional deer that we would see. That was about it.
Growing up as a kid, were you familiar with Sasquatch or Bigfoot?
Before I saw what I believe was Sasquatch, I had no idea. I never heard of it. I've never watched any movies with it, like, didn't know what it was. So my views, you know, my views now, I believe, you know, after, like you're saying, after watching shows like Finding Bigfoot, it just confirmed what I saw was, you know, a Sasquatch. And I'm not ashamed to tell anybody. Like, it's a conversation piece to me. Everyone knows that I love Bigfoot, and if they see any Bigfoot paraphernalia, they'll always get it from me, you know, like keychains or mugs or whatever. Anything to do with Bigfoot, they're always giving it to me. So they know that, you know, I believe in it, and I'm not ashamed of it. But as before, you know, I was probably about 8 years old. Before that, I had no idea what it was about.
Well, Angie, can you tell us way back when, how old were you when you had your encounter, and can you tell us about that?
So I was around 8 years old, and the things that I remember is that it was an early evening, and like the sun was still out, but it wasn't like, you know, it was kind of going down, but it was still bright, like kind of like, I don't know where you guys are right now, but it was probably about as light as it is right now, 7 p.m., you know, in the summertime. And like I said, we have like an acre, and I was out in the backyard with my cousin, and she's about 3 years older than me, and we were outside jumping on this board that my brother had made for lacrosse. He used to play lacrosse, and he had it standing up, and he would just, you know, practice on it, throwing his lacrosse ball. And it had fallen over onto the ground, and the ground was really unlevel. So it was like bouncy, and so we were jumping on it and just having a good old time, and then all of a sudden I look to my right, and on the tree line of our property, we had a doghouse. I don't remember how big it was, but when I was at, you know, that age, it seemed pretty big. It wasn't as tall as me, but probably I would estimate like around up to my chest or something like that.
Angie, what kind of dog did you have?
We had a German Shepherd.
Okay, so it was pretty good size.
Yeah, yeah. So I looked over to the right, and I see this thing kind of crouched behind the doghouse, and it had like caramel color kind of fur, and I remember the shape of its head was like, you know, what everyone says, that kind of cone-shaped head, and so much fur that it just like ran into its shoulders. You couldn't really see from where I was, where the way he was crouched, I couldn't see a definition of his shoulders, but I could see he was like pretty wide. And it looked like he was smiling at me. And I screamed on the top of my lungs and bolted to the house. And my cousin, I don't know if she saw it, but I think she kind of copied me, and she just screamed, you know how kids do, and just followed me and just copied me. And I ran into the kitchen where my mom and aunt were, and in our kitchen we have this big, huge window that faces the backyard, and I was, you know, so frantic I could barely speak. I could barely get out when I was trying to tell her what I saw, and then finally after I calmed down, I told her, and my mom's like, no, that has been your brother. Your brother's just fooling around and all that. And I said, no, Mom, you know, my brother is at such and such. I knew he was at some kind of event thing. I don't, you know, my mom, a few years ago, I was talking to my mom about it, and she says, I do remember you coming into the kitchen and screaming for your life, like I've never screamed before. So after that, I had nightmares for years, and sometimes I was thinking back, I'm wondering if some of them weren't nightmares, because I would see Bigfoot in my window, in my room, when I was sleeping, like when I was in the bed, and the window was like quite high up in the wall. But when you're a kid, it just looks, you know, really high up, and so I don't know how high up it was, but I would see his head in my window. And so, again, I don't know if that was nightmares and reality or what, but freaked out for years. And we had lots of, you know, after watching shows, Bigfoot and Finding Bigfoot, we had lots of fruit trees, like apples and pears and plums and cherries, and we had berry bushes, so a lot of food stores, you know, and I don't know if they eat, you know, that kind of stuff, or if they're more of a meat eater, but that could have been something that attracted it.
So, Angie, you had mentioned that you had some fruit trees in your area.
Yeah.
Do you ever recall any stories of just having any fruit come up missing in large quantities?
Not to my knowledge, no. I don't remember.
Be interesting if you ever asked your mom, because Sasquatch is known to be a fruit eater. We have a lot of people through Arkansas, southeast United States, anytime huckleberries, blackberries.
That's exactly what we had.
Yeah, and so they'd come in for the blackberries, and because there are so many, you know, black bears in British Columbia, of course, a lot of people would think that they're black bears. However, you know the difference, right, between a bear and between, you know, something that looks not like a bear.
Yeah, definitely. And we never, like I said, we never had any reports of bears in our area because it wasn't hilly. It wasn't like in the mountains. It's not mountainy except for the outer skirts, like the Rocky Mountains and whatnot. So that to me, that's where I think bears, you know, make their habitat. And then as soon as you start building up there, then they come down. But at this point, this was like in the, which I probably didn't tell you, it was late 70s, early 80s is when it happened. So I was born in 72, so it must have been like 1980. So at that time, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of development around us. And then so I just kind of forgot about it, you know, for years and years and years. I never even thought about it. And then these shows come on. And the two things that made me really believe that that's what I saw is two different episodes where on Finding Bigfoot where two ladies were hiking and they stopped to take a break and they're sitting on these big rocks and they heard kind of a weird sound and they looked over and they saw this Bigfoot standing there looking at them, and they said that it looked like it was smiling at them. And that's exactly what I experienced. And the other thing was two kids were jumping on a trampoline and they saw Bigfoot, and Bobo of Finding Bigfoot said it's interesting because he's heard many stories that kids that are jumping on a trampoline, they see it and they believe that, you know, Bigfoot kind of likes to see kids jumping on trampolines. I don't know if it's they're having fun or what attracts him, but that was the other thing that made me think, because on the board when we were jumping, that kind of is similar to a trampoline. So those two things, I was like, okay, that's definitely what I saw. And that's all I can really remember.
You know, it's kind of interesting, Angie, there's a lot of emerging evidence that a lot of Sasquatch encounters happen around kids. And I think some people, you know, the school of thought is just that kind of pure energy that kids have as opposed to adults. We're busy in our heads to where you're out just having a good time, and that's something that they think it actually attracts Sasquatch. Now, you said you were there was a tree line close to you. About how far away was that tree line?
This is how I can explain it, because I can't give you feet measurement or anything like that. But so we lived on an acre, and the front of the house was really quite close to the front yard tree line, like where the street was. It was pretty close. Where I was, it was probably a little bit past half of the yard from the front. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So like maybe half an acre in is where it was. And so then another, I would estimate maybe a little bit less than half an acre to the tree line from where I was.
Now, you said that it seemed like it was smiling. Can you describe the face in as much detail as you can, maybe the ear placement, color of the skin? Can you describe the face to us?
So I just remember, I don't remember the ear placement. I don't remember even seeing ears, honestly. But I definitely remember the hair, the fur was more like the light caramel color, and a little bit, the skin was a little bit darker than the fur, like actually probably quite a lot darker. And I just remember it looked like it was fine. That's all I can remember. I don't even know if he was showing his teeth.
I was just curious, like in your feelings of what you saw, did you feel like it was more of an ape or was it more human? What do you think?
I would say more human. I don't know why. I felt like more human than ape.
Were its facial features more like a gorilla, would you say, or more like a human?
I would say more towards human.
I know that a lot of folks, when they see Sasquatch and they get a good look at that face, that their mouth is extremely wide. In other words, the ends of their mouth actually go back to where our ear placement would be. So maybe that's kind of what you saw. And I've heard people say that it appeared as though it was smiling, but as they looked, it just had a really wide mouth.
Gotcha. That would make sense.
Out on our website, too, Angie, and if you have time, under topics, you can go down to photographic evidence. There's an area called faces. We put out there, but just different faces from people that have described it or, had these encounters. And so sometimes looking at those faces is kind of regression therapy. You look at it and you're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I saw. And so some people will say it's a cross between like 5 and 8 or 7.
This is very interesting. For some reason, number 10 is looking kind of familiar. Let me keep looking just to see. Oh, and then 23. Also number 27. Between number 27 and number 10, those two together kind of, I would say that's how he looked. Because of the way the fur is and the color. Yeah.
I had a question. So on the the German Shepherd, was it a male or female? Do you remember?
It was a male.
Okay. And was he full grown, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. So average German Shepherd about 24 inches in height, and it just kind of doing some math here. So let's just say the dog house is 30, 40 inches tall. Do you remember how much of the doghouse that was exposed? Did you see the shoulder? So could you just see kind of the silhouette, and how much of the body could you see?
Yeah, I saw basically like to where the shoulder, to the bottom of the shoulder. Okay, so you know where your arm meets your body, kind of like the armpit. That's what I would say. From the armpit up is basically what I saw. I didn't see the full body at all.
Do you remember on the face, too, if you saw any skin, or was it mostly hair? Do you remember?
I would say more skin than fur on the face.
And do you remember, too, and this is a long time ago, I know, but do you remember any, like, smell or odor in the area?
Not at all. But I do remember one thing, is there was near the tree line, like in the trees, in the forest, but close to our tree line, there was like this pit in the ground. It was like pretty big. And I always wondered, I'm like, did kids do this? Or like kids hanging out here? There was like, I remember like a beer can in there and like a little bit of trash. And I, just recently, like, thinking about our interview, I was trying to, like, reflect on everything, and I was wondering, I wonder if that was, like, a nest type of thing. But why would it be so close to the house. I don't know. And as far as neighbors, like, you couldn't see the houses between the trees. It was like pretty thick brush, if that's how you say it. But the strange thing is I never ever saw him again. Like, and me and my friend that lived next door, we would go through the trails, and I wasn't really scared after. Like, I wasn't scared while I was up and awake. I never really thought about him much. But when I was going to bed, that's when, you know, it would start going in my head, like, thinking of him coming to my window. It was just weird.
Do you remember going back out? Like, so in this area that it happened, did you have any fear of just going back out and playing in the backyard?
Yeah, not really. Like, maybe, I would say maybe a couple months after, like into the fall, I would always kind of look before I went out. But it wasn't always on my mind. It didn't make me stop going outside because he didn't really, I mean, initially he scared me, but he didn't do anything. You know, he didn't chase after me. If he did that, then I probably wouldn't go back outside. So.
Now, you mentioned, Angie, that your dreams and your sleep seem to be different after this. Can you expand on that?
It was like I was reliving what I experienced in my dreams. You know, every detail from, like, jumping, having fun, laughing, to turning my head and seeing. It was like replay. It was like my mind was hitting replay. And I just kept dreaming it all the way to, like, running into the house and telling my mom what I saw. But then occasionally, you know, it would seem like I was having a nightmare, and I would see him in the window. But you know how you have those dreams where you're kind of awake, you know that you're dreaming, so you're like, oh, well, I can do anything because I'm dreaming. I don't know if you guys experienced that.
Yeah, I think they're referred to as a lucid dream.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look that up.
Lucid, a lucid dream, to where you realize you're actually dreaming and can navigate through the dream is what it feels like a little bit. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Exactly.
Yeah, I know that a lot of times in this, like, lucid dreaming, that's like, you know, they're jumping, and they turn and they look, and then it kind of feels like they're in slow motion, right? So I was just curious how you relive it. As a kid, too, you'd mentioned it kind of came to the window. Was that more of a dream of it coming to the window, you think, just from the fear, or was it, do you really believe that it actually was coming up to the window?
I you know, when I think about, like, during the time, I just, you know, pass it as a nightmare. But in my adulthood, I wonder, did I actually see him in my window a couple of times? Like, I know the majority I was dreaming. I had to have been, but I just have a feeling that a couple of times he really was there. And I've also heard, you know, so many stories how they do come and look in the living room when someone's watching TV or what have you. How he would know that that was my room, no idea, but so weird. So I wouldn't want to open my eyes because I didn't want to see him in my window. But that's all I can really say about, you know, my dreaming.
So, Angie, you had mentioned that, you know, that you were having dreams. How long did those dreams last, you know, from the time you had your encounter? About how long did they last?
Not very long at all. I think it seemed to me like real time, like exactly the same motion and, you know, distance between screaming, except I think the running part, I think that seemed to be slower in my dreams. Like, I felt like I was running but going nowhere out of fear. And I did have the occasional time, like, when I was sleeping, I'd wake up and I would have had a nightmare, and I was so freaked out that I couldn't even scream. I couldn't even call for my mom. I was just, like, stricken with frozen fear kind of thing.
And then how long did these dreams continue like that? For
like quite a few years. Like, I would say into my early teens. I would say about 12, 13.
do you remember too, so, and I know this is a long time ago, but you remember screaming, but do you remember having any other feelings? Did your body feel any different when you came in the house?
Yeah. Like, I felt weak and, like, kind of shaky, you know, because I was scared out of my wits. And I couldn't really get out what I was trying to say right away. Like, I had to calm down. I just remember I was kind of weak. And I felt like, too, when I was running, I felt like my legs were cement. Like I was running so slow. Like I could not run fast enough.
Now, were you at all, Angie, like perspiring? I know you're a little kid and you're out there playing, but did you seem to have any kind of exaggerated perspiration or anything like that?
I don't recall that.
Had you heard of infrasound? Have you heard of that before, Angie?
I actually learned about it when I listened to your May 2016 podcast, and you were talking, or I think it was the man from Oregon, but he was living in Arizona.
Yep, Mark. Yep.
Yeah, I remember hearing about it then. That was my first time. So I know you can get nauseated and whatnot. And
basically, you know, that whole feeling of being stuck in cement or frozen in time is what the predators seem to be able to emit. So just kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
So living in British Columbia as a kid too, I was just curious. Were there a lot of, did you ever have like any experience with like the First Nation tribes? Did you ever see like Bigfoot statues? So it's kind of become, you kind of described earlier, it's kind of a symbol of your life kind of now, but do you remember growing up as a kid just being around Sasquatch and Bigfoot?
It's interesting you say the native Indian part of things. I did grow up around a lot of native art. One of my uncles, he was an actor pretty well off in British Columbia, and he lived in Gibsons, BC, which is an island, and where his TV show was taped. And he had a big log home, and he had a ton of native art. And my dad as well, he had some native art, but more native jewelry. And masks, you know, I would see the masks things a lot. But I don't really, and totem poles, you know, there's totem poles around, and, you know, in Stanley Park, which is like where the Vancouver Aquariums, they have a lot of totem poles, but I don't remember a lot of mention of Bigfoot at that time.
So now that you've had this kind of regression, we hear quite often from people that they've had these, like Bigfoot as kind of their symbol of their life, right, or Sasquatch, and you see a lot of people driving around and it'll say, I believe, and those types of things, and a lot of people don't come forward, but I'm just curious, like now, looking back, you know, do you find yourself doing more research? Do you find yourself...
I definitely do. Looking up other people's experiences and talking to friends, come to find out, I have friends that have had experiences too in Washington State, like Granite Falls. Where else? Granite Falls, Snohomish, which is close to where I'm at. And, and even Granite Falls, that's not that far from where I live now. So talking about it, they know somebody. If it's not them, they know somebody that has had an encounter or some type of experience. Oh, also Wenatchee. A friend had some weird experience in Wenatchee. So it's kind of cool to, like, you know, start talking about it and be like, oh, yeah, we're going to find a Bigfoot. And they're like, huh? And then they'll just be like, oh, I saw something like that. I think it was a Bigfoot, and they proceed to tell me. And
it's interesting. In the Pacific Northwest, I mean, it's kind of a, you know, I guess a subculture here, but no one's really afraid to talk about it. We do interviews all across the country, and like in the Midwest or in the Southeast, you know, a lot of folks hesitate to talk about it. You know, they're looked upon as crazy and things, but it is interesting up here where it's a little bit more open that you run into other folks that talk about it.
I think, funny note, Harry and the Hendersons movie, I think that really, I know it was like made in the 80s, but it's one of mine and my husband's favorite movie, and I think it kind of, it doesn't frown upon or make, you know, Washington people look stupid. It's just a kind of a humorous thing, and you know, it was done in Seattle and also on the way to, what's that city called?
Yep, near Skykomish. There's a little coffee shop on the way up the hill towards Leavenworth.
On 2, right?
Yes.
Leavenworth, that's the city or whatever it is.
Yeah, on your way up as you're coming. Yeah, as you're coming up Highway 2 on the right, there's a little coffee shop there. I actually stopped there last Sunday, and I happened to run into a guy that was there, and he was he had his Sasquatch Summit shirt on, and he had ran into us, and I had my shirt on, and of course then he came running over, and so it was really cool. But they're also trying to pick up some of our merchandise. That was really neat. But that's a really nice little coffee shop, and it's a really cool place.
We had no idea that part of the movie was filmed there. We had no idea. So I was like, we have to stop, and saw like the big, you know, wooden carved Sasquatch, and they have like, and it's not a cast of a Bigfoot's foot, but it's like the common size, I guess, that people come across, and you can put your foot up to measure the difference. And just a little while ago, actually, my friend that told me about you, she showed me a picture of this guy that put his foot beside this silhouette of a footprint, and his foot is the biggest by far that they've measured, like as far as a human being is close to the size of a Bigfoot's foot. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, I've got an interesting one, and I think I told you, but Paul Freeman, who shot the footprint back, or a lot of the footage back in 1982, his son Michael sent me a cast, and I wear 14EE, and it dwarfs my foot.
My
and it's,
gosh!
Yeah, it'll make the hair stand up on the back of your neck.
Oh my gosh!
For our listeners, what would you share about your thoughts on the subject?
Not to be so close-minded when others go to share a story, and not to make them feel like they're a weirdo or not whatnot, because with some people they can be really sensitive and, you know, trusting that they can share it with you, and if you ridicule them or what have you, then it wouldn't, you know, make them feel very good.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people come on and they say, you know, it's nice to come on our show and talk about it because there's no fear, right? And when they talk about it with other people, they'll shut down or they'll be quiet, and they've even had friends just completely disown them over the topic. So
wow.
So how do you feel sharing it?
I'm totally completely fine. I don't like broadcast it to everybody, but even today, I was with my friend that I've known since 8th grade, so 20 plus years, and I said, oh, I have a phone appointment tonight at 7. I gotta make sure I'm home, and she's like, for what? I said, oh, and I explained to her, and she's like, what? You've never told me that. I'm like, oh, I haven't? All these years I've never told you? She's like, no. So it's, you know, not something I just blurt out, but it somehow becomes a topic, you know, with coworkers or what have you, and I've had a good response, like, because they know me, they know I'm not crazy, they know I'm, you know, a stable person, so they're like, well, if that's what you believe you saw, then hey. My husband, on the other hand, he teases me about it a lot when I talk about it. But that's okay with me. I don't care. I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't a bear. So if I would love to actually do a day trip. I'd like to do a search in the day for little evidence things, and so would my friend's husband. But our spouses don't really want to do that. But that, you know, gaining more information makes me want to do kind of a field trip day and see what I could find. But I wouldn't go into it full-fledged and make, you know, a big, huge hobby out of it. But wherever I go, when I see mountains and lots of trees, I'm always like, it's pretty squatchy out here. Thinking, you know, that I could totally envision a Bigfoot standing right there. So it's whenever I'm in the wilderness, I think of it.
Well, good. It was nice meeting you, Angie, and thanks again for coming on.
Okay, bye-bye.
This concludes our December 2016 podcast. Sasquatch Syndicate will return on Saturday, December 25th for a Christmas special. Thanks to all our listeners and those that have been out to our website and those following us on social media. Sasquatch is a controversial subject, so for all the believers and disbelievers and those that'll tell you they have all the answers, just remember we're flying through space at 700 miles per hour. Buckle up.